I think there'll certainly be another financial crisis in the near future. The world is much too uncertain at the moment, and also the recovery is much too fragile. It's been marked by a big increase in inequality. A lot of the new money created has gone into financial securities and assets which haven't got a real support in the real economy. And there's, you know, they're just pumped. I mean, in a way, economies are on a life support system. They're on drugs. And the central bank is pumping out, you know, cocaine, monetary cocaine or something to keep everything going. And it's got to withdraw. There have got to be some withdrawal symptoms along the line. And that's when you're going to run into real trouble. The American Fed is putting up interest rates, testing very, very cautiously whether the economy is now on a self-sustaining path. The European economy certainly isn't. And I don't think the British economy is either. So there will be another succession of financial crises. And why not? That's what we've been having for the last 20, 25 years. The only question is how serious they're going to be, whether they're going to be anything as serious as the one in 2007, 2008. The most relevant idea of Keynes is the destruction of Say's law, if you like. The idea that supply creates its own demand, and the idea that accompanies that a competitive market economy is always at or gravitating towards a state of full employment, if it's not interfered with. If the conditions of competition are kept that, and government doesn't interfere with the price adjustment of the market. That's the most important idea of Keynes, relevant, because a lot of wrong policy is based on believing that the market is inherently stabilizing. Take the efficient financial hypothesis of Eugene Farmer. The idea that you can leave the banks to self-regulate because they will actually form an accurate idea of the risks they're running. So they won't either overprice or underprice risks. If that is correct, you'll never get any booms or busts in the financial market. No asset bubbles, no collapses of asset prices. They'll always be priced correctly. That is one aspect of the idea of markets as self-equilibrating machines. And that's wrong. And Keynes said that was wrong. And that if you have a shock, the economy doesn't just bounce back instantly to full employment. It stagnates. You have adjustment of output and income, not of prices. And this underemployment equilibrium could last a long time in which welfare is reduced, drastically curtailed, and then you have to start again sometime. It might take 5 years, 10 years, but at any rate, it's a long span from someone's life, and it retards the growth of the economy towards a state when you can start, as he would say, not thinking so much about economics. You know, you're always, through recessions and booms and busts, you're always recreating scarcity when there's no need to do that. And so you have a role for government. Government has to have a responsibility as part of its democratic responsibility to guarantee security of employment. It seemed to me a very sensible, important thing to say in the 1930s, when there were other people who had remedies for unemployment. Hitler solved the unemployment problem in Germany. Stalin had no unemployment problem. And, you know, a lot of people were killed. I mean, you could get rid of unemployment that way. Or forced into labor camps. And Keynes said, no, you don't have to have these sort of remedies. We can do it in a democratic way. And that's such an important thing to have said then, and it's still an important thing to say, because we risk, again, the rise of extremism. People feel that governments aren't interested in, their lives, that they're just interested in getting a small group of people rich and wealthy and secure and not interested in anyone else. Huge growth of inequality, huge increase in what David Graeber called bullshit jobs. And it's just wrong. It's just wrong. And so Keynes was angry. He was angry about the indifference of governments to their own people. Well, the overthrow of Keynesian economics really came in the 1970s as a result of growing tension in economic life in Western countries from the late 60s onwards. And that had to do with simultaneous growth of inflation and unemployment together, which seemed to knock out the Phillips curve, the idea that there was a trade-off and that if you could get a little less unemployment for a little more inflation, whereas they seem to be going up and down together. And so the Keynesians didn't really have any explanation of this. And Milton Friedman came along and said, well, if you try to run an economy at a rate of unemployment below its natural rate, then you will just get increasing inflation. And each time you do it, the trade-off will worsen, or rather the situation will worsen. And in the end, your policy will become completely ineffective. The only effects it'll have will be on the rate of inflation. Now, if you try to understand why you got this development and why inflation started to rise, perhaps one way of looking at it is to think of the inflation not as a monetary phenomenon, but as a cost-push phenomenon, in which you have unions, very powerful unions, forcing up their real wage and cutting into employers' profits, and employers then in a position to price their products higher, at a higher level, in order to offset this erosion of profit share. And that takes you into Marxist territory, Marxist explanations. In other words, there was an attack on profits going on through the workers' push on wages. So the political economy then resolved itself into how do you weaken the power of the trade unions. That's point one. And also, on the other side, how do you create a more competitive economy so that you have more of a market, more competition in the product markets? So I think that's the form the anti-Keynesian movement took. Classically, you had all the anti-trade union measures, including the creation of unemployment, which gave you the lever to pass legislation weakening the trade unions. And on the other hand, the beginnings of globalization to free capital markets from national regulation. So I think you can tell a Marxist story about what went wrong, and you can tell a monetarist story about what went wrong. It's hard to tell a Keynesian story about what went wrong. And I remember very much talking to actually Keynes's leading disciple. I mean, he was an old man by that time, but he was Keynes's research assistant, someone called Richard Kahn, a very eminent economist in his own right. And I said, how do you explain what's going wrong? And he said, we never thought the trade union leaders could be so stupid. Now, that is a confession of some analytic inadequacy. the personal relationship starts with my decision to write a new biography of Keynes, because there was an old biography which has many merits, but it was a bit out of date by this time, by someone called Roy Harrod, who knew Keynes and was a great admirer of his. But anyway, it was by this time 20 or 30 years out of date. So I got to know Keynes pretty well in the course of writing three volumes on him. As a person, I got to know about his family, his circumstances, his parents, his school days, his education, and the thing about the Keynes family and Keynes personally, they kept very complete records of everything. They were sort of hoarders, if you like, of material, papers, hundreds and hundreds of boxes of Keynes papers, all in Cambridge, kept there. So I got to know him very, very well as you can do. So I felt I got to know the way he thought about things. I sort of, in a way, said, he's going to take this view. And so I think I then come to be regarded as an authority on Keynes, and so I still lots of people keep, well, what would Keynes have said about this, or would he have agreed with that, and so. The second thing I found working on Keynes, and even so, and living in his house, I had to sort of do something really good, because anything else would have been an injustice. He challenged me to go to the limits of my knowledge, my capacity, my literary ability to write about him, to go to the limits. And I felt that I did the best I could at the time. I started it without any serious background in economics, I should say, because my first degree was in history. But as soon as I decided to write about Keynes, and I'd prepared by writing more general things about the slump of the 1930s, I knew I had to learn some economics, and quite seriously. And so I did apply myself to economics with two very, very, very brilliant teachers, one at Cambridge, one at Oxford. And I then read Keynes. And, you know, that's an education. He was a wonderful, wonderful persuader, and you started to understand economics very, very seriously just by reading a great deal of Keynes. Well, of course, I then read other things, and I read all the people around Keynes, and then I had to follow what happened since Keynes, and so you could say, partly self-educated myself in economics, but with quite a bit of help, and. So that's the real answer to the question of my relationship with Keynes. I felt it a very close one, and I still feel, maybe wrongly, that I understand him better than anyone else living now, but maybe wrong.